Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. If you desire to intimately connect with yourself, significant other, children, family, friends, community, and higher power, then this is the show for you. We explore intimate topics, inspiring life stories, spirituality, and insightful tips on strengthening relationships. The show is hosted by Dr. April and her co-host, Coach K. Let's get this episode of the Bringing Intimacy Back show started. We share with you today the secret power to intimacy to create the life you love or love the life you create. Now here's your host, Dr. April, and her co-host, Coach K.
Welcome to the Bringing Back Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. How are you doing, Coach K? Oh, look.
Doing very well. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's a beautiful, hot day in July.
Yes, it is. The heat is definitely showing up for its season this year, and I'm here for it as long as I can escape into the AC every once in a while.
Yes, definitely. We're blessed that we can escape for,
Yes.
Yeah, many people can't. So that's just a blessing. And but even just being alive today is just a blessing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. So I am so excited about today's topic. The soul, what's it good for?
Yeah, and I sing it every single time because of the song. But I'm.
What's the song?
War, who? But is it good? And then I think of the movie, with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. I can't think of the name of
it. Yes. And the soul, because many times people don't really think about the whole aspect of the soul.
Right.
That we always talk a lot about, I talk a lot somewhat about the mind and the body, and the inner spirit, but there's the soul.
Rush Hour, that's the name of it. Thank you. But yes, people really do leave out the soul. And my husband was asking me about that because of this show, and we don't think about it enough. We don't appreciate it enough, honestly, sometimes. So I'm glad that we're going to be talking about it.
Right, because it's all a part, and people are like, well, what does this have to do with intimacy?
Oh, they will soon learn.
Exactly. They are going to soon learn. So, but before we bring on our guests, every month we do a charity of the month. And in July, we've been doing the Love Yourself Foundation, which is a great charity because it talks about, even as we're going to touch on today, that inner self, that inner part of us, learning to love yourself.
Absolutely. The conference I have coming up in October for ladies, it's all about that. It's about healing that piece of you so that you can take those barriers down to love yourself. So I'm glad that we are highlighting this foundation. Right.
Because when you love yourself, which they have a website, Love Yourself Foundation, www.lyfoundation.org, that helps all of humanity.
It does. Absolutely.
Yes. And as humans, we all have souls.
Yeah. And we have to take care of it.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And that the connection between one soul to the next soul, to the next soul, to the next soul, it's also how we talk about intimacy. So I know people are like, well, what does this have to do? Well, we're going to tell you in a moment. We're going to take a break, and we are going to bring back a specialist who knows a lot about the soul and what it's good for and how we can incorporate it in our lives. We'll be back in a moment.
Sex should not be the elephant in the room. The fourth ebook of the Improving Intimacy book series from Bringing Intimacy Back, It's All About Sex, helps you navigate every which way you can tend to your sex life. Pulling out all the stops, dive into the sensual read about sex toys, silky linens, and date nights. Improving Intimacy, It's All About Sex is available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and paperback. Search Dr. April Brown on Amazon to view all her books on improving intimacy for yourself, spouse, and more.
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. I'd like to welcome Cory Rosenke. Yes. Welcome to the show, Cory.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great privilege. I appreciate it so much.
Yes. So Cory he wears multiple hats. He's an author, a pastor, a presenter, a pursuer of truth, a songwriter. Yes. Yeah. I forgot what else. You do so many different things.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a school teacher. I'm a coach. Do a lot of things. Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. So on this show, one of the questions that we ask everyone is, what does intimacy mean to you?
Oh, man. For me, intimacy is connection. It is a necessary connection. It is a deep intimacy is what, for me, makes everyday life so meaningful, so rich. Without intimacy, there's just a wandering, so to speak. There's just an accomplishment of tasks. But with intimacy, there is a joy, there is a connection, there is a togetherness. And yes, I'm very excited. I love the title of your podcast, Bringing Back Intimacy, because I think it is something. We live in a world where we can be connected through all these digital means all over the place, and yet for all our Zooms and all these different ideas, we're more disconnected than ever, and intimacy needs to be brought back. Connection needs to be brought back.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I love how you said that. And that's exactly what the purpose of this show is about. Yes. And so as we're talking about the soul, what's it good for? I think it's probably good to start off with how you define soul.
I appreciate that. Yeah. When I talk about the soul, I always I'm talking about our non-biological selves. I think that is probably the easiest way to look at it. Sometimes when we talk about the soul, people automatically think, oh, this is a religious topic or something like that. I would say the soul is actually a topic that can be proven mathematically, historically, scientifically. There's just so much evidence that we as humans exist beyond biology. And yet we live in a world that is obsessed with the biological. Our whole societal structure really is built around catering to the cravings and the desires of the body and the mind. And meanwhile, we have souls beneath that, in some cases, I think, are starving to death. And I would even suggest to you that the world we live in today, we see so much chaos, so much bitterness, so much anger, so much confusion. And I would say a large part of that has to do because we have forgotten who we are, because we have forgotten our deepest selves.
Right. I think one of the main reasons that it shows that people get divorced, but even something that we suffer society-wise, is loneliness.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
And loneliness, it doesn't mean that you're by yourself, but that that soul is not connecting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the opposite of intimacy, so to speak, right? It is this isolation that makes, you can have all the money in the world, all the fame in the world, but if you are alone, life's pretty tough. If you feel alone.
Right. So what do you think the soul is in today's world craving for, and what do we need to do about it?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is to officially, once again, acknowledge the reality of our soul. I often say to people, I'll look them straight in the eye. Sometimes it's over Zoom, sometimes it's in my office, sometimes I'm speaking at an event. And I want people to know that more than a brain or a body, you are a soul. It is, I believe that it is the attribute that best defines us. We aren't defined by the reflection looking back in the mirror, or the number on the weigh scale, or the diploma on our wall, or the ring on our finger, or the lack of a ring on our finger for that matter. Who we are is much deeper, and it's much more precious, and it's much more connective. And I really want people to come reawaken to that awareness, because as I mentioned, the whole culture today is absolutely obsessed with our bodies and our minds. You think of every television program, every medication, every desire to climb up a ladder in a workplace for that matter. It is all created around the body and the mind, the ego, and meanwhile, there is a soul that is starving to death. And I didn't, when I first, I almost say stumbled onto the topic, I wasn't looking for the soul. I was looking to ask the question, why do people do what they do? Why do I do what I do? I grew up very poor. I grew up, there was a season of my life where we as a family were homeless. We lived in a tent by the lake, just driving around from
Canada.
Yeah, in Canada. Yeah. And another season where we lived way high up on a mountain in a log cabin. By high up on a mountain, I mean we looked down on the clouds, kind of high, no power, no running water. To a certain degree, I was that lonely boy, and wandering the mountains with my dog and my books, and wondering why. Looking at the world, ever since I was little, I was wondering why. So I was deep into Plato and Aristotle and all the early philosophers, right? Then I was getting a little bit more into psychology, and so it was into Freud, and then I got introduced to C.S. Lewis, where some philosophy came in, right? And it's just like, and I love, one of the things I love about C.S. Lewis, he's just a thinker. He just opened a whole new world to me. And then C.S. Lewis brought me to A.W. Tozer, these people who weren't just people of faith, but who were deep, deep thinkers, and that kind of. So as I was studying, why do we do what we do? You can go to philosophical books over hundreds of years and papers that were written, and they mention certain things, and some of them, which I will talk about as cravings of the soul, the human need for significance, right? It is a massive drive within us that we need to know on some level that we are special, right? And yet for years, this craving has been thought to be some sort of psychological craving, with no evidence to that fact, by the way, right? But someone's going to say, oh, it's connected to the prefrontal cortex, right? Which is what everyone likes to talk about, the prefrontal cortex. And of course, that the important part that it is, right? And yet there is no biological sense whatsoever behind the craving for significance. In fact, from a biological sense, it can be a big hindrance. And yet we all, every single one of us, need to know on some level that we are special. It goes deeper than psychology. It is layered underneath. And so all the cravings, when I talk about the 5 cravings of the soul, I believe that they are the core of all human motivation. I believe that all human activity since the beginning of time can be centered around and explained through identifying the 5 cravings of the soul. One of them, which I mentioned, was significance. And as I mentioned, so I went out in search of understanding why, specifically as a behaviorist. Why do people do what they do? And especially myself. Why do I do what I do, right? I think a lot of us ask ourselves that. We get ourselves into a situation, and if we have a moment at least of honesty with ourselves, it's like, why am I thinking this? Why am I behaving this way? And so that it was in the pursuit of a human behavior that I realized we have all these different cravings, that these cravings could be named, and that they are deeper than psychology because they are not biological.
Yeah, and so I know you mentioned significance, and I do believe that each soul is unique.
Yeah.
And special. Yeah. What are the other 4 cravings?
Right. So I often start with people. I start from the beginning. I always say security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence. These are the 5 cravings of the soul that I believe can explain all human activity and drive. And as I mentioned, I call them cravings of the soul because they are beyond biology. There is a great movement towards neuroscience today, which I personally like to geek out on. I get really excited about talking about neuroscience and brain chemicals and the connections between all of them. But the truth of the matter is it's a constantly evolving field. And just because a certain part of the brain does something when a certain behavior is exhibited, that doesn't mean that part of the brain is the source of it. It simply means that part of the brain there's an activation there. And so when I talk about the soul, I believe that the soul is the boss. That in the hierarchy of humanity, we are body, soul, body, mind, and soul. And our soul is the boss. Our soul sends directives to the mind, and the mind sends directives to the body. And so when we begin to view ourselves this way, when we begin to view ourselves as more than biology,
right,
I mean, I don't want to suggest that it's separate, but that there is a non-biological part of us connected to the biological part. When we begin to look at ourselves that way and other people that way as well, it changes everything. And so when it comes to security, as an example, I break down security this way. So the craving for security is the craving for, first off, physical security,
Right.
which we could call to a certain level biological craving. And that is, there's going to be people who talk about our survival instinct, our desire to stay alive, right? And yet, as humans, our craving goes beyond staying alive. Our craving goes to the point where we want to stay alive forever.
Right.
An ongoing, non-biological, it's beyond this particular moment, right? But it's not just physical security, it's a relational security. It's intimacy. We all have within us that deep desire to be connected and to know our hearts are safe in the hands of those who hold them. And so much of human activity can be understood by looking at people's desire and their craving for security, physical security, and relational security. And of course, the next one, and that is well documented in the field of psychology. Right. The reason I call it a craving of the soul is because it is a non-biological craving. It goes so much deeper. And the second one is identity. And of course, this one is huge in the world today. I mean, it always has been, but it's kind of up front there. And identity asks the symbiotic questions of who am I? Why am I? Do I have purpose? Do I have value? Those 4 questions need to be answered by every human soul. You can have all the money in the world. You can have, all the guys or the ladies in the world. You can have fame and notoriety. But if you don't know who you are or whether or not there is meaning or value to your existence, you do not have peace.
Right. And you know what I was thinking, Cory, when you said the soul is the master, I was thinking, well, in the body, we have doctors and things can be done to fix body. And then even with the mind, there's a lot of research to send brain waves and all this other 50 million stuff. Yeah. But the soul, it's really pure, and it's not something that we can, as humans, really go and change unless we do it internally. And so you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I think that a healthy soul, our soul gets healthy when we understand our cravings, because we understand ourselves, and then we can begin directing them to helpful places.
Right.
Right. An example would be, I always say this: you show me a control freak. And there are husbands and wives who will look at each other sometimes and they'll say, my spouse is a control freak, or my boss is a control freak, or whatever accusation we make. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. You show me a control freak, I'll show you someone who is desperately craving security or significance, right? And so when you're dealing with a control freak, and if you want to try to somehow love them or have intimacy with them or connect with them somehow, you can tell, I need somehow, what can I do to help? And sometimes it's not on you to start with, but sometimes if you're wondering how can I help, you're going to help them in some area of security. It could be physical, it could be relational, or sometimes, like I said, it's just a desire for significance. But control always comes back to the cravings of security and significance. And then there's another one in there, right? So we have security, identity, independence, and I break an independence down to the craving for freedom, which we would call personal autonomy, and the craving for individuality. That is to say that we all have some sense, we all need to know that we are unique in some way. Even those rare identical twins that look the exact same, and they seem to love wearing the same shirt and the same hat and getting the same haircuts, at some point, and it always comes, at some point they will desire some differential. That sets them apart. Maybe they're the athletic twin or the twin that likes comics books or whatever it is. There has to be something that sets them apart. If we don't have a sense that we are somehow unique, we feel redundant, unseen, without use. And so security, identity, independence, and then as I mentioned, significance. We all need to know at some level that we are special. And we pursue this in different ways, right? For some people, it's like, I have to have that degree on my wall. I need to have a doctorate. I need to have the PhD. For other people, they just need to know I'm the best baker. I make the best chocolate chip cookies or whatever it is. But we all at some level need to know that we are special. And then and all of those 5 cravings, by the way, are well documented in the field of psychology. You can find countless books on them. The reason why I think we err by thinking of them as psychological is because they are non-biological cravings. They don't make sense in a biological context. They are layered deeper, and I believe we need to look deeper. And then the 5th one is innocence. And that is that we all have a desire to feel like we are not guilty. In fact, I would say that one of our biggest disruptors of intimacy, of connection, almost every fight we've ever had started by us perceiving that someone subtly or not so subtly accused us of wrongdoing or wrong thinking. They touched us in that innocent nerve, our desire for innocence. And so what do? We generally push back hard, right? And the fight erupts. We get defensive. And so, like I said, almost every fight kind of stems from that. Now, all of these cravings, I always say, they're good things. They are beautiful things. I mean, if we didn't have a craving for significance, think of how boring the world would be. Mm-hmm. There would be no beautiful art. There would be no beautiful architecture. Our music would be drab and boring. Everything we built would just be about functionality. But because we have that craving for significance, we create beauty. It's fantastic, right? And innocence, I often go back to that as well. We crave innocence, but we don't just crave to be not guilty. We crave to be good. I don't want you just to view me as a not guilty boy. I want you to view me as a good boy. There is a thing inside me that wants to be viewed as good. And that is a beautiful thing. Our craving for innocence, when it's directed appropriately, makes me want to live in right relationship with you guys. It inspires me to ask for forgiveness or to apologize or to follow societal rules. But when it's out of hand, it's the root cause of cancel culture today. It's the root cause of so much bitterness and so many fights. It's that need inside of us to feel like we are innocent, but not just innocent. We want so much innocence that we are actually righteous, which is the flip side of innocence, right? And sometimes I say, I don't know if it's just the progression of the craving or it's when our need for innocence melds with our need for significance. Anyway, it kind of culminates in a sense of self-righteousness. I want to know that I am righteous. And probably I want to know that I'm more righteous than you, right? And that's, again, righteousness is not a religious thing at all. The whole of society is craving this idea that I'm right, I am moral, I am pure, and I'm probably more pure than you is what we really, tend to want to think, which is why we get in so much fights, where there's so much friction, as our cravings begin to collide with one another.
Right. Well, it definitely seems like you have so much to offer, and even in the sense of these 5 cravings, there are people out there who may be feeling lonely, insecure, like what's my purpose and all that kind of stuff. And your book seems to address some of those issues. Mm-hmm. Yes. Could you let the audience know where they could find you and what's your book about?
Yeah. So my book is called The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the 5 Cravings of Your Soul. And so I explore these topics philosophically, historically, and of course, by the route of faith. And I believe I call the book The Magnetic Heart of God because I ultimately believe that these cravings can only be satisfied ultimately in our Maker. They can't be satisfied. A non-biological craving cannot simply be satisfied in non-biological things. And so they demand connection with each other. They demand interaction with each other. And even on a bigger scale, they demand connection with our Maker. And so that's why it's called the magnetic heart of God. It's the idea of these cravings drawing us to the only place they can actually be satisfied. And so I explore them, like I said, philosophically. I explore them through my faith, through history. CoryRosenke.com is my website. And I always direct people there because it gives them access to social media, as well as direct contact with me if someone wants to contact me directly, as well as contact where they can buy the book. But really, it is a journey of self-discovery. We are, as I mentioned, so caught up in a world where we simply look at each other as biological creations. We don't mean to, right? the statistics say that virtually everybody believes in a soul, and yet very few of us are living like it. And I suspect if we really want to understand our spouse, if we really want to gain intimacy with each other, we need to look at each other in a much more holistic way. And that includes not just the body, not just the mind, but the soul.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, then. We'll be back in a moment.
Are you a business professional? Dr. April Brown's latest book is for you. Whether you are newly hired or managing a team of employees, her 30 intimacy-driven business principles will help you progress towards career success. Learn how to show up as your best self at work, what it means to cultivate a meaningful career, and how to avoid burnout, all while living up to your highest professional potential. Improving Intimacy, the book for business professionals, is available on Amazon in Kindle, Audible, and paperback. Search Dr. April Brown on Amazon to view all her books on improving intimacy for yourself, spouse, spirit, and more.
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy Show, where intimacy is real. I really enjoyed the 5 cravings and how
Absolutely.
Yeah, and how that in the sense of the soul, how those cravings can be healed through using the soul and that connection with the higher power.
Yeah, just listening to those, and especially the one that stood out the most was that independence piece, especially when you're thinking about couples. And to me, kind of almost the era of the thought of 2 become 1. And they lose that independence. And that's where a lot of the strife and the tension comes into play, because they forget that you're still an individual person that just made a commitment to walk a parallel path versus just gluing it all together. And so I really enjoyed just hearing about that.
Right. And also, and even in relating to that, the one about significance, because I think many times, especially as women, or when you just give so much, you kind of lose, well, what's my purpose? So I thought that was really great. So definitely check him out. Yes. So what other shows are coming up?
Yes, some amazing shows coming up for Grad Day. It's already August coming up. Woo! So next week on August the 3rd, we have a heterosexual relationship as an intersex or trans man with Lino Martinez. On August the 10th, we have Can You Date Someone with a Different Religious Belief? Me and Dr. April will be talking about that. It's going to be pretty good. And then How Food Fuels Intimacy with myself and Dr. April.
Yes, well, definitely check those things out. Also, call to action on the Bringing Intimacy Back. We have intimacy quiz. So if you're like thinking kind of even for yourself, and you're like, how truly intimate am I being with myself, with my higher power and my relationship? We have a personal intimacy quiz there you can take and look out. And of course, there's one if you're in a relationship. But definitely, if you like this show, please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and give us your feedback, and definitely check us out. And we'll see you guys next week. And this has been the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Bringing Intimacy Back, where intimacy is real. You can also find us at bringingintimacyback.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Dr. April Brown's 7th book series, Improving Intimacy, is now on Amazon. We'll see you next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe.